Welcome to Should I Read It? Should I Read It is a weekly podcast that takes a deep dive into books. I'll provide a summary of the book and tell you how the ideas in the book relate across all the books we've covered so far. Alright, let's get this out of the way first. I know I have said in the intro that this is a weekly podcast, but this has been anything but weekly. In fact, it's been like weekly for a little bit, and then not for months, and then weekly, and I don't know. So what I'm going to say is that I'm still reading books, that I am still writing about them, and that the gaps that I've had when I haven't written about them, I find that I'm not understanding the books like I want to. Here's my commitment. I'm going to keep reading books, and I'm going to keep putting out podcasts as I can. I'm not sure what that means, though, how frequently, but they're going to keep coming out. So if you like books, if you like my take on books, please stay subscribed. And I'll change the intro at some point. Although if you've followed me for a long time, that may be a while. Today, we're going to look at Where Good Ideas Come From by Steve Johnson. Now, I think that a question that is asked often by anyone with a bit of drive is, how on earth do you come up with a good idea? How did Charles Darwin or Steve Jobs or Hedy Lamarr come up with the groundbreaking ideas and technology that they're credited with? And that's the question that Steve Johnson works to answer over the 8 chapters of Where Good Ideas Come From. Early in the book, Johnson identifies the theme that he really thinks weaves throughout the ideas in his book. And he says it like this: if there's a single maxim that runs through this book's arguments, it is that we are often better served by connecting ideas than we are by protecting them. As Johnson really begins to dig into his points, he introduces us to an idea he calls the adjacent possible. I kept thinking of this as the idea that we stand on the shoulders of those that went before us. These people that went before us give us a platform, which we address in chapter 7. So now we can take the next step and invent the thing that will contribute to the platform. You can see this idea in evidence in scientific discovery, as many people discover the same thing within a very short window and across the globe before they could even communicate well. Then the 6 following chapters are all about how we can best get more parts on the table to bring more ideas, more things into the adjacent possible in our lives. First up is liquid networks. This phrase is taken from the fact that liquid conducts electricity, and in that liquid you can stimulate a single neuron, but again, across the liquid, the second one is going to be stimulated without having a physical connection just through the liquid. Johnson looks at the city as one of the prime examples of a liquid network. It allows people to specialize and thus expand their knowledge down a particular field. Then this knowledge is intermingled with others inside their own specialized networks, and voila, we have a combination of ideas that bring some invention with parts from different fields. A few weekends ago, I watched Valley Uprising, and this is a Netflix documentary around the Yosemite Valley. And in that, we see the evidence of this happening between Royal Robbins and Warren Harding early. They had different ideas about how to climb, and their ideas collided off each other, and they really drove each other to new and interesting heights. And although there was a lot of fireworks at the beginning, there was some respect, at least on the part of Robbins, toward Harding near the end. Then there's also Yvon Chouinard, who was climbing at the same time. He founded what is now called Black Diamond, but it was originally called Chouinard Equipment, and bankruptcy, other stuff, employees bought it. It's Black Diamond. He also uses different ideas from all these climbers in Yosemite Valley to push the gear forward that they climbed on. All of the ideas mashed around together, and we have some very iconic companies in Patagonia, which Chouinard continued to run as the clothing company that we know and he's still involved with, and Black Diamond. Plus we have advances in the gear that wouldn't have happened without these different climbing ethics crashing together. Johnson likens cities to the free interchange of ideas in a primordial soup, which is an ideal way to generate new things. He does caution us against the blanket open office policy, which is where a lot of businesses have gone with this. He says that the standard open office is not what businesses should aim for because it brings mere distraction. They should be looking for something that's a configurable office solution where teams can form and reform and meet up in the middle and just play together, but not have this big open office where we're going to, ideas will just float through the ether together. Now, the next way that Johnson suggests we get more ideas on the table to work with is the slow hunch. This is the concept that our ideas just don't leap fully formed into our brains. They take time to develop, and the initial barely existent spark of an idea is what blazes its own path later. He says it like this: and so most great ideas first take shape in partial, incomplete form. They have the seeds of something profound, but they lack a key element that can turn the hunch into something truly powerful. And more often than not, that missing element is somewhere else, living as a hunch in another person's head. Johnson says that these ideas are hard to put a finger on, though, at the beginning. He says it like this: most hunches that turn into important innovations unfold over much longer time frames. They start with a vague, hard-to-describe sense that there's an interesting solution to a problem that hasn't yet been proposed, and they linger in the shadows of the mind, sometimes for decades, assembling new connections and gaining strength. This murky state of the idea that can't quite be formed into anything yet means that a lot of them are going to die on this. To combat this, Johnson says we need to write everything down. This does beg some questions that I want to dig into in future writing and maybe in a future podcast. Probably not here, but another one. And that's, how do we write it down, digital or analog? How do we review? How do we find those old murky ideas as well? And how do we connect them to something else later? Johnson doesn't really provide any answers to those questions, outside of him saying that he uses DevonThink and he uses their See Also feature to connect ideas that are stored in his digital brain. This is like an AI feature that DevonThink has on their Mac OS desktop version. Now, serendipity is the next key to getting more work on the table, according to Johnson. You simply need more material in your brain if you want to be able to connect ideas in your own internal liquid network. For this, Johnson recommends reading widely across genres and looking at other recommendations to get into fields that you may not have any more than just a vague awareness of. He also says that we need time to think if we want to be able to connect these ideas together. Some of you are going to tell me that you don't have time to read or that you just don't have enough time in general. Now, Johnson addresses this reading at the edge, what he calls reading in the morning, reading at night, at the edge of your day, by taking a page from Bill Gates, who does a 2-week reading vacation. He suggests that you take a vacation like this so that you can have a large amount of varied ideas in your head in a short order, and then you can create connections in those 2 weeks. Now, this is a good idea, and there are so many people that don't have time to read outside of fits and starts of the day, though. I mean, who can take a 2-week vacation just to read? Not a lot. I know I couldn't, even though I read a ton. My 2-week vacation is to hang out with my family. Now, if this is you, like me, then reading at the edges is what you got. And if you only have a little bit of time, spend 10, 20, or 30, or whatever minutes you have in the day reading every day. I'm also reading The Miracle Morning. He has a 10-minute, read 10 pages a day. Even if you can do that, you can probably finish, I think his numbers are 15 books this year. Keep expanding your field of knowledge if you want to be able to draw strong connections across fields, or it's just not going to happen. Now, one thing that feels a bit funny from this book published in 2010 is his faith in the Google search algorithm. We know a lot more now about this, and we know that it's really prone to confirmation bias, which basically means that you're going to find the stuff that you already believe. You're going to search for something and you're going to find, yep, hey, look, the top results are exactly what I already believe. He doesn't provide a good way to really branch out and make sure that we have opinions that are different from our own. So that's something you're going to have to take on yourself. Now, error. It comes into building good ideas when we can filter out the true errors and results that we just didn't expect. Think of penicillin. That's a contaminated experiment. What if it was just thrown out because of that contamination? I'm sure antibiotics would have come along again eventually, but how many more lives would have been lost before this, contamination happened again for someone else? Here's where I start to notice a bit of repeat in the ideas that Johnson is putting forward, though. Look at this next quote. It is, a good idea has to be correct on some basic level. We value good ideas because they tend to have a high signal-to-noise ratio. But that doesn't mean you want to cultivate those ideas in noise-free environments, because noise-free environments end up being too sterile and predictable in their output. The best innovation labs are always a little contaminated. This contaminated environment seems a lot like a liquid network to me. In fact, near the end of the chapter, he talks about conferences and meetings with colleagues across disciplines being great because they may see the noise in a different light and bring a new idea to the table. That's serendipity and liquid networks in action, plus a bit of acceptation, which we're going to cover in the next chapter. Now, acceptation, I had to check 3 times to make sure I was reading this right, but it's the idea that something evolves for reason A and is useful for reason B. So one of the things that he cites in there is they figure that feathers are first formed for heat to keep animals warm, and that they had a secondary benefit of gliding and then flight. So that's acceptation at work. Another example of this is the loom, which started like punch cards in the 1800s to program looms, and until 1970, punch cards were used for programming still. Again, with the idea of acceptation, Johnson comes back to liquid networks and cities when he says like this. Cities then are environments that are ripe for acceptation because they cultivate specialized skills and interests, and they create a liquid network where information can leak out of those subcultures and influence their neighbors in surprising ways. On a personal level, Johnson says that you need to have varied hobbies that have nothing to do with your main line of work. These hobbies will bring skills to bear across disciplines that may result in new ideas for you. It's like building your own liquid network around you. Just like reading, he said earlier, was like building a liquid network in your brain. The final place that Johnson says to grow good ideas is platforms. Now, this is where we think of the Homebrew Computer Club, which had members from many of the big tech giants of the last number of decades. Think Microsoft, think Apple. You could also think of the invention of the web, without which we wouldn't have YouTube or the blog that you're reading or the podcast you're listening to. To get these things we have now, someone had to develop the platform for the web first. Again, this felt like a different face of the same idea as Johnson threaded the idea of liquid networks in here, and slow hunches throughout the platforms, this is a bit of exaptation as well, because Tim Berners-Lee was not thinking about YouTube when he opened the protocols for the web. He says you may have a slow hunch, but then the platform emerges and you have that flash that ties it together with what you just found out, because you can now build on top of that platform, which you found out about because you're Liquid Network. See, that's why I think we have a little bit of repeat in here. Now here's his conclusion, the fourth quadrant. Let's start with a quote. For every Alfred Nobel inventing dynamite in secret in the suburbs of Stockholm, there are half a dozen collective inventions like the vacuum tube or the television whose existence depended upon multiple firms driven by profit motive who managed to create significant new product via decentralized networking. Johnson finishes the book by addressing this fourth quadrant, which really took me a bit to figure out actually. According to Johnson, the fourth quadrant is the freely shared information in the world. It's a liquid network and serendipity kind of all rolled into one. The fourth quadrant is not patents and not lawyers because they stop the free flowing of ideas. One of the big places that Johnson says is a fourth quadrant network or fourth quadrant source of information is academia, because all you have to do is provide a footnote and you can build on any idea you want. You can mix and rematch as much as you want. Now, this is true inside academic walls, but I live the frustration of trying to get research when I don't have access through the paywalls. Last year, I added up the paywalls I need to pay to get the research I wanted to access that day in total almost $10,000. I need to pay that every year to maintain access to the research fields that I'm interested in. It would actually be cheaper for me to go get a course at a college that has access to these journals and never show up. This doesn't seem like a fourth quadrant source of information unless you're inside the blessed walled garden or you're willing to use services like Sci-Hub, which I may or may not ever use. As always, our final recommendation is, should you read Where Good Ideas Come From? But I got a few points before we dive into the recommendation. I didn't realize this until I started writing the introduction. Johnson doesn't really cite anything but male inventors. He doesn't cite many women. He may have cited one, but once I realized this, I flipped back through the book and I couldn't find one and I couldn't remember one. So I'm going to say maybe he doesn't cite any because I don't have definitive proof. I wonder if some of these examples wouldn't even exist. Particularly, I wondered about the fourth quadrant being academia because women are underrepresented at the higher levels of teaching and thus have less access to this method and ideas. So they're going to have to find other ways to get at some of this same content. Finally, I already made a bit of mention that some of the chapters and content felt like a bit of repeat, or at least like two very similar sides of the same coin. Now, I didn't feel annoyed by this while I was reading, nor did I feel like I was wasting my time reading the same idea over and over. But you could just see that it really threaded together and that all the ideas are a deep network together that work together. If you're looking to build a better liquid network so you can generate good ideas, then Where Good Ideas Come From is a really good book. It's going to give you lots of ideas on how you can work to build a better network of ideas around you. I also developed at least 3 different research ideas for further reading and further, podcasting, further writing later on with the extra material he cited in the book. I would recommend this book for you, and I'm going to be purchasing a hard copy because I got this one that I read from the library.
Thanks for listening to Should I Read It? To support the show, you can leave me a review in iTunes or a heart or a star in whatever podcast player you use. These help more people find the show. If you want to get more reading done, you should get an Audible membership. If you use curtismchale.ca/recommends/audible, that will help the production of the show financially.